Good evening. I'm Elaine Quijano. Welcome to CBSN Originals. Originals is our in-depth, long-form reporting on the major stories impacting the nation and the world. Tonight, we travel to the U.S. border with Mexico to talk to some Hispanic voters who represent a small but vocal minority, Latinos who want to see Donald Trump become the next president of the United States. We've gathered a panel of people from across the political spectrum to discuss Trump's unprecedented candidacy. But first, here's our report.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
I mean, he's not saying that we're all rapists.
It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people.
I have family members that are involved in this stuff, and they are in a state jail at this moment, and I would love nothing better but for them to be deported.
Mr. Trump has a point. There's no accountability of what they're doing. There's no accountability of what they've done.
I'm Hispanic and I vote for Mr. Trump.
Nice to see
you. Hi, sorry.
No, it's good. I see you've got your Trump sticker.
Yes, of course. My friends, they say if I'm Trumping, so I have to say yes every day I'm Trumping.
Trumping, what does that mean exactly?
If I'm
Trumping?
just talking to people about Trump, campaigning in any way about Trump, informing people as far as his policies are concerned, because a lot of people don't even give him the chance.
Critics say, though, you know what? He crosses the line sometimes.
He does cross that line, but at the same time, he's the only one that will cross that line. He's the only one that will say what's on people's minds, and it's working. It's working right now.
Perform the duties of this party and prepare for our conventions and to change this country back to the way you want it to be. Lord Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. You have family members who
I do
are
have
undocumented immigrants.
They're family members from Mexico coming into the United States, doing what they were paid to do, and going back.
What does that mean exactly? So illegal activity.
Illegal activity as far as maybe murdering somebody. Right now, sad to say this, I have my father sitting in jail.
I live right on the border, so I am familiar with undocumented people coming through the backyard of my house. I am familiar with narcotic traffickers dumping dope next to my house, and I participated in the arrest of these people. I was raised here, worked most of my life here. I was police chief here, for many years. We got people actually, tie ropes and rappel down. We have people that drop dope and then they have somebody pick it up, especially on the Mondays and Fridays because of the amount of people that are here in the flea market days. So they made several apprehensions, this Border Patrol guys. I mean, they're extremely active in this area.
People need to wake up and realize that the illegal immigrants that are here that have no form of other self-employment do turn to drugs, do turn to the cartel business.
My opinion on the wall is that we definitely do need a physical barrier. There's a big misperception that the Rio Grande River is a natural barrier. That is completely false. That river does not stop drugs. That river does not stop the people coming across.
One of the main issues that this country, that we have had for so many years, is what to do with the undocumented people that are already residing here in this country illegally. I have a Social Security card. You have a Social Security card. We're accounted. I have to pay IRS taxes when I'm due. I mean, and these people are not paying any of those.
I'm Mexican American, but I was raised here in the United States all of my life, my whole life. In late 50s, my father, my abuelito, my abuelita, mi tía, they came to America.
And they did it legally.
They did it legally.
What do you think people get wrong about Hispanics in general when it comes to, politics and assuming, oh, well, he's Hispanic, he must be against Trump?
A lot of Republicans do not show their, their real true colors for whatever the reason is.
They don't.
They don't. I do. I've never been ashamed of being
You think there are
conservative.
more like you?
Yes.
More people who support
Yes.
Trump
they,
who
they
are.
just go and vote a conservative. They just won't say it.
He could get so much more support if he just openly walked the same streets and realized we have so many common interests in terms of securing the border, want to look at different alternatives. There's a whole crowd of people that completely support him, but that he's made it so difficult for them to be public. They won't put a yard sign, but they will quietly go in the booth because they think he can actually get something done.
Okay, well, let's see how we're doing in New York.
All right, 69, baby.
69. All right.
My whole life, when I was going through the public school system, I would ask my teacher, what's the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? And the teacher's answer was always the same. It was, you know what, mijo? You're poor, you're Hispanic, you're a Democrat. And you know what? That's not true.
Most of the time, the individuals who are supporters are in the business community, and they do a lot of business back and forth with Mexico. They could be realtors, they could be restaurant owners, and they just don't want to offend their customers because on the surface, so much of what Donald Trump has said is he's made a foil out of like Mexico.
Who's going to pay for the wall? 100%.
Laredo is the only border town that Donald Trump has visited, and it's because you invited him.
Our organization is the only organization that actually represents Border Patrol agents. So when Donald Trump started making headlines out there, our agents started kind of voicing their opinion, and they were reaching out to our organization and saying, you know what, we like what Donald Trump is saying. We like that he's for border security. So at that point, I decided to reach out to Border Trump so that he could get the real perspective of what actually happens on the border.
When you walked away from that meeting, was there something that you learned after having that opportunity to see him face to face that maybe you didn't know before you had that meeting?
Well, it gave me an opportunity to actually realize that, Mr. Trump was real.
Our country has kind of lost respect and with worldwide politics and standing in different things, military strength, economic growth, employment, a big loss in the middle class. And Mr. Trump's presentations and things, he talks about these things that are of great interest to me.
A lot of strategists realize that if the Republicans could get 30% of the Hispanic vote back in the 90s, that they could win statewide elections. The Latino vote is critical for Republican success.
You are a U.S. citizen, an American, but you consider yourself Mexican.
Yes.
Help me understand that as a U.S. citizen who considers himself Mexican, you don't take offense when you hear someone say, Mexicans are rapists, Mexicans are bringing drugs.
I don't believe he's talking about homeless.
You don't feel insulted
No,
when you hear
no.
that?
I consider Mr. Trump my amigo, nuestro amigo, because he's trying to set, a procedure that will be legally followed by those people that want to become residents of this great country of ours.
This is about vibrant trade, the economy, jobs, doing this legally, and helping with the narco problem and the drug problem. If you can understand those issues, then you'll realize we're just as American as everybody else.
The whole concept of being Mexican American, why is it that different ethnicities always put American second?
We're Americans first. And we're born Latinos, Mexican Americans, whatever they want to call us and label us, because of our ancestry heritage, but we're Americans, so we're the same.
So that's a look at the situation along the U.S.-Mexico border. Up next, we're going to bring in our panel to talk about the impact that Hispanic voters will have on the 2016 race for the White House. And a little later in the hour, we'll speak to the former mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, a Hillary Clinton supporter who's created a new super PAC over concerns about Donald Trump's immigration policy. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Please stay with us for more CBSN Originals. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CBSN Originals, our series where we take a look at the story behind the headlines of the news we report here on CBS News. Tonight, we've been focusing on some Hispanic voters in border towns who support Donald Trump's bid to be the next president of the United States. To help us tonight with our analysis, we've assembled a panel of journalists and people from across the political spectrum. In our Washington bureau is Ed O'Keefe, who's a political reporter for the Washington Post. And with us on set is Julio Ricardo Varela, the political editor for Futuro Media Group, and Republican strategist and CBSN political contributor Leslie Sanchez. Welcome to you all. Leslie, let me start with you. A very simple question here. Does the GOP need the Hispanic vote?
The Hispanic vote is critical for the Republican Party to remain a majority party. The issue is they don't need to win a majority, the 51%, so to speak, to be successful. They need to be competitive somewhere just shy of 40%. If they can do that, the Republican Party has a long history of winning elections. But without Latinos, we will continue to lose on a national stage.
How are things looking right now at this point?
It's extremely depressing. Donald Trump is underperforming with Latinos right now. We saw that in Texas as well, and some areas that we have statewide data. But the question is, can he close about a 10-point gap in the next 5.5 months? And a lot of people argue he can be competitive.
All right. Well, there have been some developments that have happened in the political scene since we went down to Texas. Let me start off by asking you, Ed, in Washington. One of the developments has been the resignation of Ruth Guerra, who is an RNC official. Explain who she is and why her resignation is significant.
If you watch Univision or Telemundo in this country as a Spanish language viewer, and you watch the news or their Sunday morning public affairs shows, their version of Face the Nation, for example, you've seen Ruth Guerra. You know who she is. She's the spokeswoman, basically, for the Republican National Committee, who has spent the last 2 years explaining and defending the GOP. And often, especially in the last year, the questions were about Donald Trump. And it turns out, perhaps no surprise, that got a little frustrating for somebody who is a Texan from the area, the state that you visited as part of your report, of Mexican descent, and grew frustrated with the idea that she was going to have to spend the next few months defending Mr. Trump at a time when, depending on the poll, somewhere between 60 and 84% of Hispanics have an unfavorable opinion of Trump, where at this point he may only get about 32% of the Hispanic vote overall, and that's being generous depending on the polls. Leslie says he may need just close to 30. I would argue he needs about 43%. If you look at the recent trends. Mitt Romney only got 27%, and that's part of the reason why they lost last time. So her departure really is the tip of the iceberg. While there may be some Hispanics across the country who support him, as you point out, a small percentage, there are many, especially in professional Republican politics, who are quite conflicted right now about whether they continue to be active in the party, or whether they help Mr. Trump, or whether they stand back and maybe go work on down-ballot races and hope that somehow the party can salvage itself after the election in November.
Julio, as we saw, though, in the piece, those folks who are behind Donald Trump, who think that, well, you know what, he talks a lot about this kind of rhetoric, building a wall and all of that. We don't necessarily think he's going to do all of that. They still like what it is that he has to say overall, and that is to take a much stronger position on issues of border security. What do you make of all that?
Well, I've been covering the Latinos for Trump phenomenon, I can't even say it anymore, for about a year. And it's this whole issue of, like, he's unfiltered, he's telling the truth. There's a little bit of backlash from sort of this assumption that Latinos are really into Hillary Clinton, which is another completely different issue.
People don't like to be labeled that way? Or
Well,
I
don't think there's this enthusiasm when it comes for Hillary when you compare the campaign to, say, 2008 Barack Obama. So there's a couple of factors coming in here. And when you talk about Trump, yeah, they see him as like this strong man, like this guy that's going to get it done, and that has appeal. And every time I ask Trump supporters why, it's all about, no, we're not going to talk about facts. We're going to talk about, he just tells the truth, and this is something that I think this country needs. And it's not surprising that Latinos, when you think about the numbers that Leslie was talking about, 27% for Romney, he lost, right? So we're still talking about this sort of window of 27 to 32%. And I agree with Ed. I don't think that's going to cut it for Donald Trump in a general election.
Yeah. So, Leslie, you and I were down there. We spent some time down there. Explain to us, for folks who might think, well, you know, Latinos isn't that a monolithic group, and some people might not understand. There is a complexity to the identity of Hispanics, Latinos.
Sure, and I think what's really important is to point out the fact we went to Texas. Texas is a solidly red state. I'm fifth-generation Mexican-American. And in Texas, growing up, you think of yourself as an American first. Well, really a Texan, and then an American. You know, and like, you know, what part of
Clarification
land, you know,
for the record.
Just for clarification, and Texans would know that. And but there is this phenomenon of La Frontera, the area along the U.S.-Mexico border, which has a very complex relationship with Mexico and different parts of the southern part of the Americas, because trade moves back and forth, which is extremely important to the viability of Texas's economy. They have people and family. They go back and forth to weddings and restaurants and food, and they share a culture that is really a phenomenon, and even their own words and kind of language that we use. But what was fascinating about this election is you have many of these traditional, you know, solidly Hispanic counties who voted for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. Now, they were small numbers. That certainly did. It's not reflective of the whole state, but the state does have a very conservative bent to it, both because it's former military, small business owner, and some faith evangelical that really lean right of center, and pretty much to an extent about 38% of them vote for Republican candidates.
Ed, let me turn to you. Do you know, are there enough undecided voters in the Hispanic and the Latino community that Donald Trump could perhaps still, in the 5.5 months or so he has left, persuade to come over on his side?
No, I don't think so. Based on what I've seen, I mean, if you're Hispanic in this country, like Luis, Leslie, and I, you probably have an opinion of Trump at this point, or you are surrounded by people who do. And I think it'd be very difficult for him to find enough of an undecided vote to suddenly sway people. You know, and you guys, I think the genius of this project was it was a reminder that Hispanics are not monolithic in this country, that there are very conservative, very liberal, pro-military, or people who serve in the military, people who don't, urban and rural, Texas, California, Colorado, they're all over, and they have to be appealed to differently. You know, there is not one way that they can be wooed by either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders over the course of this campaign. And I think, you know, the genius for Trump would be to go down there to the southern regions, as he did, and win over those more conservative Hispanics who see the border violence, who have a better understanding of it than perhaps people who are Dominican and live in Rhode Island, or Cuban Americans who live in Miami and for whom immigration, illegal immigration, is not an issue, or Mexican Americans who live in California and feel very differently about it. The candidate and the campaign and the political party that comes to grips with the fact that it's not a monolithic group and it has to be appealed to very differently is the one that's going to win. Fascinating to have this conversation and to get to know these people, but remember, it's the Hispanics in suburban Denver or suburban Northern Virginia, just across the Potomac River here, or in parts of New Jersey or in the Orlando area. Those are the Hispanics that take issue with Donald Trump, and because they live in states that are going to be the battleground states, those are the ones that really are probably ultimately going to decide this election.
Let me ask you, Julio, you know, the Trump supporters that you spoke with, as we saw in our piece, immigration was a driving factor for a lot of these folks to support Donald Trump. Was it just immigration, people that you've talked to, or are there other issues that could potentially be areas there where Donald Trump could expand and broaden his appeal?
Great question, because it really, I talk about this with a lot of Latino conservatives when I interview, and it's all about the trade-off issue. And it's, if you look at polling, you know, yeah, no, immigration amongst U.S. Latinos, it's an issue. Is it the #1 issue? It really depends on the poll, right? And so you see a lot of conservatives who might say, you know what, I get, you know, the rhetoric might be a little bit too much for me, but that doesn't bother me as much because I believe in, like, you know, the economy, you know, trade. Like, those issues are resonating with a lot of Latino conservatives. But at the same time, when you talk about Latino evangelicals, they're still on the fence with Donald Trump. I mean, it just happened with the cell phone video when he was saying, you know, national, Christian, Hispanic, these are great words, whatever he said. And that was supposed to, that was a cell phone video that was shown at a national Latino evangelical conference when they're trying to get the olive branch from Donald Trump, and he shows up in a cell phone video. And I actually read a piece in CBS News about this, that were just, people were like, this is how you're gonna come back and win us over? This is the olive branch? So he still has a lot of work, especially with Latino evangelicals who, by the way, favor comprehensive immigration reform in a way that does not talk about deporting of 11 million people.
You know, what's fascinating about what he's saying is a lot of this has to do with cultural respect, right? Going back to the 60s when you first started seeing Hispanic efforts by political campaigns, Viva Kennedy and John Tower, who was a senator in Texas, but they used to do the beer buses. You know, they have the tacos and the beers and they get on a bus.
Even Nixon.
Even Nixon. It was kind of like a condescending way, but it's like, let's bring some beer and nachos and let's get together and have a taco fest. And that used to be Hispanic marketing, Hispanic for political campaigns. Unfortunately, with the big taco salad that we saw just recently. Tacogate, hashtag. It was a reminder of this kind of knee-jerk, let's just try to do something very simple. The people who have done extremely well, whether Republican or Democrat, have had a long history with the Hispanic community. They've been in the neighborhoods. They've talked to them about VA benefits and Social Security benefits. They understand the plight of these families and economic opportunity for small business and the faith community. So you can't do something on the fly. It has to be a sign of respect.
Ed, you know, I know you said you don't think there's any room there for Donald Trump to expand his base of support among Latino voters. However, you've heard Julio talk about the fact that there isn't necessarily the enthusiasm on the Democratic side among Latino and Hispanic voters for Hillary Clinton. Is there a danger, you think, Ed, that perhaps Donald Trump in the months ahead still may be able to, whether it's through an economic message or an immigration message, get some of those folks who might be hesitant to support Hillary Clinton to his side?
Absent a full-blown apology and a decision to no longer pursue the border wall, immigration's not the way to do it. If it's the economy, it's about creating jobs and sort of boosting economic prosperity for all Americans. The economy always ranks as the #1 issue for most Hispanics in most national polling. Look, I think the concern for Democrats is complacency, the idea that the Clinton campaign is going to take them for granted and is not properly or effectively going to target Hispanics in different parts of the countries in different ways, in English and in Spanish, in Spanglish, by using certain different influencers in different parts of the country depending on where they're talking to them. That's the concern that Democrats have right now about the Clinton campaign. Bill Clinton is a well-regarded, highly revered figure among Hispanics in this country. She gets some of that, but I think as others have suggested, she's going to have to go out and earn it a little more. There's been some thought that maybe the way to do that is to pick a Hispanic running mate. That's not necessarily going to do it, but it certainly would boost enthusiasm. And if there's any concern that the number is slipping between now and when the convention's held in July, then you might see her consider that.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, I know you have to run. I want to thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you guys.
All right, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk to a former police chief of a U.S. border town about why he thinks Donald Trump will be able to solve America's issues with immigration. Stay with us. You're watching CBSN Originals. Welcome back again to CBSN Originals. Tonight, we've been discussing the impact that Donald Trump's campaign has had on the debate about immigration in this country. We've been speaking to a group of journalists and strategists who've been covering the 2016 election. With me on set here in New York is Julio Ricardo Varela, the political editor for Futuro Media Group, as well as our Republican strategist and CBSN political contributor Leslie Sanchez. And I want to bring in Tony Castañeda. He is the former police chief of Eagle Pass, Texas, a border town. He supports Donald Trump's candidacy for president. All right, so Chief, let me just start off by asking you, why do you support Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and for the invite, and it's certainly a pleasant trip to get here.
We're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, and I'm very happy to be here to support and voice my support for Mr. Donald Trump. When initially announced his candidacy, I really didn't foresee him being a leader of the pack as he's now become the presumptive nominee. But over the months that he was on the campaign trail and started talking about issues of great importance to me, which is border defense, economy, and also the making America great. I loved it.
What does that mean to you, making America great?
Well,
again,
it means a lot. Because at the beginning, you know, when he was talking about making America great, in my eyes, over the years, in the last 8 years, let's say, I have seen a deterioration of our standing worldwide, politically, economically, and respect through military. And when he started addressing issues about the lack of NATO partners not doing their part and letting the bulk of the responsibility fall on the American shoulders, that costs money. That's money. When he talked about the illegal immigration of undocumented people coming into the country, and I'm not only talking about Latinos, I'm talking about illegal immigrants coming in or staying here. I saw that as an economic burden and a lack of accountability on the American government on these individuals coming into our country. When I mentioned about strong military, it was very disturbing, even though I am not a veteran. Disturbing to hear about the lack of medical services to our American vets. That, to me, was extremely powerful when he mentioned that he wanted to address those issues. And that's when I got on the bandwagon and started promoting those ideas that he's trying to work for and pushing.
You're emotional about his candidacy.
I'm very emotional because the situation, especially on the border, I saw during my tenure as police chief of the community, I saw the involvement of what he's saying about murders, involvement in narcotics, mainly narcotics, thefts in our community committed by this individual. But more than that, I saw that a lot of the undocumented people were being abused by their own people that are bringing them across. My wife worked in a federal facility where they detain undocumented people. And she would tell me some of the horror stories that the people would relate to her. Women getting sexually assaulted on the trail. Women with their feet all torn up. The lack of medication for them. And I believe that this is where Mr. Trump is trying to address, is that if you want to come into our country, let's do it legally so that you don't expose yourself to this type of abuses that are out there. And I have family that lives in Mexico, and I visit my family in Mexico all the time. And I have several of them that are in the process of becoming American citizens, and they're doing it the right way. Everybody talks about America being a land of law and order. Well, they need to respect that. They need to come into this country the legal way, and that's the way I feel. And we're not seeing that. I mean, we can't absorb other countries' deficiencies in how they manage their own government and allow, no excuses for the exodus of thousands of people to come into the United States and become an issue for us, financially, economically, in all aspects of social right.
I can see your passion. We saw your passion and heard your passion in our piece, and you were very open about that, and you have been open about your support for Donald Trump. What kind of reaction have you received from friends, from family members about that?
Well, surprisingly, when I got on the bandwagon and started talking about it, surprisingly, the people that I talk to and communicate regularly, they were very supportive. And as a matter of fact, they said that they're going to vote for Mr. Trump. And they're going to support him. So there is a lot of Hispanics that are going to vote for Mr. Trump that haven't stood up and be counted. They're going to be there. I don't know what the percentages are, but I hope and I continue to motivate them to keep them on the loop. So when election comes in November, we're going to be there.
Despite your passion, as you know, your voice and your support for Donald Trump is still among the minority voices in the Latino community. What would you say to people who are not at the border, who are other Hispanics, other Latino voters, about what your experience has been that perhaps they might not understand? Because there's been strong reaction to this notion of Latinos getting behind Trump. There is sometimes ugly rhetoric that goes along with that, and an intolerance for any kind of diversity of opinion when it comes to supporting Donald Trump. What would you say, or what kind of argument would you make to someone who hasn't been in your shoes on a border town and seen what you've seen?
Well, my first recommendation to them is to become educated in what he's saying and actually read and listen the news media, the articles coming out on the paper, study, so that you can be a bit well informed of Mr. Trump's position. and not let other people guide you like sheep. And you make your own decision based on what you have learned. That's what I have done. I read, I watch the news, I absorb what I think is good, and then I'll make my own decision at the appropriate time. But my decision is already made. I'm a Trump supporter.
But can you see how some people might take offense at some of his remarks about deporting undocumented immigrants, about building a wall? Can you see how some people, as you well know, have argued that that kind of rhetoric is divisive and unwelcoming?
Well, when I first started talking about supporting Mr. Trump and pushing him, and they said, well, he doesn't like us and he calls us murderers. Well, no. I mean,
that's not what you heard.
No, that's not what I heard, and that's not what I read. He does mention that among those people, because I've seen it through my law enforcement experience. I've seen some of those people that are hiding amongst the need that are actually coming. And the great majority of them are good, hard-working individuals that are looking for a better life. And I have no problem with that. But there's rules. And if they want to come into our country, they need to come in the right way. So what I tell people, concerning that is that he's not talking about me, because I haven't murdered. I don't hold dope. He's not, and certainly I don't take any offense concerning what he mentioned. But you need to hear what he said. He didn't say all of us, are murderers. But I know, because of my law enforcement experience, that among them there's narcotic traffickers, there are child predators, there are people that committed heinous crimes in their own respective countries. Not only Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and because I read it in the local newspaper where agents of the U.S. Border Patrol detaining and arresting people that have been previously deported for murders and things of that nature, been deported back to their respective country, and then they come back to the United States.
Let me turn to Leslie Sanchez. Leslie, so you have talked in the past about the conservative element within the Hispanic Latino vote, and here we are presented with that with the chief here. Explain to us that kind of appeal, the notion of law and order that, of course, the chief, given his background, given what he's seen, he finds that notion, that part of Donald Trump's message very, very appealing. Who else, when Donald Trump speaks this way, who else is he appealing?
Sure. What we've heard and seen so far is many conservative Democrats, especially those who formerly served in the military, like the chief talked about, are just as concerned. They like the America First message, but they are as concerned about border enforcement and border security. And it looks like the presidential campaign is going to come down to, are you pro-legal immigration? Are you pro-border enforcement? And can Donald Trump manage this amnesty issue more effectively? Can he find a legalization path? Can he find a way for goods and services to move across legally, like the chief is talking about? There's a lot of appeal to that, but he has to tone down that rhetoric that is so caustic, and it kind of blurs the vision of everyone who's really kind of in line with the message, because they're concerned that the Democrats have continued to either, like we've seen with Latino millennials who are pushing back, that the Obama administration, perhaps a continuation under Hillary Clinton, is pro-deportation, but doesn't really address the issues of meeting the needs of breaking families apart.
Julio, you want to say something?
I think this has become too simplistic an argument, and I think we have to kind of separate narco traffickers from undocumented families who are fleeing gang violence in Central America, from dreamer families that have come here, and from, their parents. The chief said it himself, a lot of these people are good, hardworking people. But Donald Trump said, I want to deport 11 million people, not all from Mexico either. We're going to put them on planes to go back to Asia? I mean, there's a lot of things here that the rhetoric has dug deep into the Latino community. And one of the things that Ed said, I actually don't agree with the fact that, if you're Dominican in New Jersey, immigration, yeah, you're from the Dominican Republic. I'm Puerto Rican. And everyone's like, you don't talk about immigration reform. Some of the top immigration reform advocates in this country are Puerto Rican. For example, like Representative Luis Gutierrez, who's a Democrat. So talking about a secure border, if we're going to talk about immigration, let's talk about that immigration. But I think what Donald Trump has done, and has done a huge disservice to this country and the Latino community, is to sort of paint Mexico as this chaotic, drug-infested country, and it's going to take over the United States. The invasion is coming, and that is too simplistic of an argument.
What do you think about that, Chief?
I totally agree. You know, there's going to have to be some very good defined strategies on how to deal with the people that are already here in this country. And we have to, because there's a lot of good individuals that are living here, but some of those individuals that are still living here in this country undocumented, they're continuing to be abused by the systems that we have in place, and other people that abuse them because they're too afraid to go and make reports you know, against the people that victimize them. So I'm sure Mr. Trump is an excellent financial wizard, as you might want to say, because of his success that he's had in business. So as a smart individual, he's going to surround himself with people that can lead him and guide him in creating good strategies on how to deal with this. The economic impact of having to deport all these people, it's too overwhelming. It's going to cost a lot of money, both in looking for all these individuals and then the cost of deporting them.
So you don't support that notion of deporting all 11 million undocumented?
No, I don't. What I do support is that those that have been here living in darkness or shadow, and they have committed crimes, they've been identified. Those need to be deported right away. We don't need those people. Those are the people that are here. We need to account for them. I mentioned in a previous interview with CBSN, there's no accountability of those people, so we don't know what they're doing. But the great majority of those people that live in shadows need to be accounted and come forth and register, be given license, so they can pay income tax, pay IRS.
One misconception that we do have to bring up: undocumented immigrants do contribute to the society economically. Okay, they $12 billion in the latest study, and you can look it up and Google it. I do all my
reading. And that comes in the form of tax
and state, local payroll. So we have to really have a serious discussion about, you know, I can spend an entire hour talking about how we got here. And there's a lot of policies from both Democrats and Republicans for the last 30 years that have gotten to where we've gotten. We also have a deporter-in-chief that people have said that. So we have to have a serious, Barack Obama is actually doing a lot of things that the chief is saying. So the one thing that I will say about this is that Donald Trump is simplifying this message to a point that he's insulting the intelligence of the American population. Because we can have a real discussion about immigration reform, but we have to have adults in the room. And I think that's something that's really important in this entire debate.
I think he's bringing up a really important point, is that it becomes a political argument. If you look at the point that many Republicans, whether it be George W. Bush, Newt Gingrich talked about this, there were reasonable voices that came to the table and said we can have some sort of comprehensive reform. But it was very much the Tea Party movement, the conservative movement within the party that made it extremely difficult to talk about it, because they thought it was full-blown amnesty, when really there's going to be a point that's somewhere in the middle. So is it open borders, or is it secure borders? Where is that argument? And right now it's too politically charged. Right. Donald Trump is benefiting from saying, just making it simple. Let's just put up a wall, let's deport everybody, but it's not realistic.
So how do you see it playing out really quickly, Leslie?
It has to be a reasonable approach that has both enforcement and some sort of legalization. He's going to have to get people and fundamentally understand that. And along the border, most of the Latinos that we spoke with that were pro-Trump never believed he was going to build the wall.
All right. I want to thank our panel for being with us. Julio Ricardo Varela, the political editor for Futuro Media Group, CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez, and Tony Castañeda, the former police chief of Eagle Pass, Texas. Thank you all so much. A really great discussion.
Thank you.
Coming up, we will speak with the former mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, about why he's raising money to stop Donald Trump from becoming the next president of the United States. You're watching CBSN Originals.
We have a candidate who wants to tear families apart and forcibly deport 11 million undocumented immigrants, who calls Mexicans rapists. That is not who we are as a people.
So I plan to continue calling out that kind of hateful speech whenever and wherever I see it. Because Latinos and Latinas, you're not strangers. You're not intruders. You're our neighbors, our friends, our families.
That was Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton tearing into Donald Trump's rhetoric on Hispanics. She is fighting hard for the Latino vote, making her campaign a clear foil to the presumptive Republican nominee. Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa joins me now from Los Angeles. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be with you again, Elaine. It's been a long time.
It has been. Well, let's talk about this. You are a strong supporter of Hillary Clinton. Why?
A strong supporter of Hillary Clinton because I've worked with her since the 90s. I know of her record. I was inspired by her effort at universal health care and actually did health care for children. 750,000 children got health care in California, no small part because of the work that she did. I've worked with her over the years as Secretary of State, as a senator, and I'll tell you, she's ready to be Commander-in-Chief.
Well, you've announced that you are forming a new political action committee. What is your goal in creating that super PAC?
Stopping Trump. I'll tell you, and I'm not speaking as a Democrat, I'm not even speaking as a supporter of Hillary Clinton right now. I have, in my lifetime, never, at least since 1968, seen such an openly racist running for president of the United States. Not since George Wallace have we seen a man like this. And he doesn't just talk about Mexicans, though of course he continues to rant about Mexicans being criminals and rapists and says, oh, maybe a few of them are okay. But he wants to close the doors to Muslims, close their mosques. He disparages women in a way and even makes fun of the physically disabled. This is a man that's unfit to be Commander-in-Chief. He's a threat to our nation, and I'm going to do everything I can to encourage voters, particularly new Americans, newly registered voters, to contact others in purple states, in Arizona, Colorado, and Florida, among others, to make sure that he's not elected President of the United States.
At the same time, Mr. Mayor, we heard from some Hispanic voters earlier in our documentary. They live in border towns. They feel the situation there is out of control, and they support Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, let me speak to that. The fact of the matter is there's been a net migration minus. In other words, more people are going back than are coming to the United States from Mexico. That's number one. That is a fact. We spend more money on the border control than we do on the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and all the other federal law enforcement agencies combined. And so this notion that people are crossing the border illegally in hordes just isn't borne out by the facts. That's one. Two, yes, we need to do more around the issue of drugs and cartels. We provide the guns. In this country, as many people know, it's been documented that we provide those guns to those cartels. We also consume those drugs, so we have to address our responsibility in that regard. You know, the fact of the matter is you can't build a wall big enough to address this situation. We have to be smart. We have to have comprehensive immigration reform. And importantly, nobody has argued that there aren't some Latinos who will vote for Donald Trump. I think the Fox poll indicated that maybe as many as 23% have indicated that they may do so. But in the end, the vast majority of Latinos, African Americans, Asians are going to vote against him. And they're the fastest growing part of this electorate. They're about 31% of the electorate.
As you know, though, there is dissatisfaction with how both parties have handled this issue of illegal immigration. Mr. Mayor, what do you say specifically to those voters that feel, for instance, under the Obama administration, not enough has been done to tackle this problem, things like border security?
Well, actually, this administration has deported more people than any administration in modern history. So the notion that they haven't enforced security at the border is just not true. And as I said, and I think it's important to understand, there is a net migration minus. When you look at the deportations and you look at the people who are voluntarily going back, more people are going back than are coming to the United States. So the notion that they're coming in hordes, that they're crossing the border, that we need this, wall that Mexico is going to build, just isn't borne out by the facts. And that's just, I'm not making it up.
You mentioned
in fact, I think you all have documented that the person who makes things up is Donald Trump. About 75% of everything he says, it's been documented, is either a lie or a misrepresentation of fact.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago about the Obama administration and the number of deportations that have happened under his watch. Would Hillary Clinton continue those kinds of policies which, as you know, have actually been difficult for some advocacy groups on the Democratic side to support?
Well, look, I don't support them, and I've made that absolutely clear. And I don't think Hillary Clinton will either. I think Hillary Clinton will work day and night to get comprehensive immigration reform. And after the Republicans lose 3 national presidential elections in a row, I expect that they're going to understand that they're going to have to address this issue. Look, our immigration system is broken. Both people on the right and on the left agree with that. We need to fix it and not just demagogue about it in the way that Donald Trump has done, threatening the forced deportation of 11 million people. And just so you understand, no nation in modern history has ever deported 11 million people. And by the way, let's be clear, not all of them are from Mexico. Only about 60% of them, 65 maybe, are from Mexico. But the only country he talks about and the only people he focuses on are Mexican undocumented. And it's just not borne out in the facts.
I want to turn to the next few days here. Donald Trump has said repeatedly that he plans to make a big play for California in the general. You've got the primary coming up, and of course, California, a state that has voted for the Democratic nominee every election since 1992. It also has a Hispanic population of over 14 million. That said, is there some concern among Democrats where you are about Donald Trump taking away some of that vote?
I mean, look, not every voter in California is going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but I can tell you that the vast majority will. This is a solidly blue state in no small part because the last time this was tried in this state in 1994, when I first ran for office with Proposition 187, we've registered nearly 2 million Latinos. The vast majority of them are voting Democrat. And lean Democrat, and I think you'll see in this election they're going to respond to Donald Trump. And I've said the reason why he speaks the way he does about Mexicans is historically we haven't become citizens in the numbers that we need to, and the numbers that other groups do, and we haven't registered to vote and gone to the polls. This year I think you'll see a surge. My political action committee is focused on making sure that surge defeats Donald Trump.
All right. Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, thank you so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for watching tonight's CBSN Originals. The discussion won't end here. You can post your comments on our Facebook page or tweet us at CBSN Live.